Hello, and welcome to what I hope will be a fascinating discussion about really the passion of collecting. All things collectible, but especially the passion and the collectability of things that unite us as a panel. And I guess the two things that leap to mind are watches and cars.
Strangely enough.
Funnily enough.
Yeah, now that you say it.
My name's Nic Waller. I'm the Executive Director of the Audrain Newport Concours. I will be your moderator. First of all, I'd like to introduce Wilhelm Schmid of a.lange and Söhne. He's the Chief Executive. You have been there, I think this is your 12th anniversary.
I think it's almost a 13th.
13.
Yeah, an old bugger in the industry.
And you've heralded a lot of changes in the company.
That's true.
Notably introducing a new family of watches, the Odysseus.
It's a watch that we always said you can wear on the weekends and during holiday and when you play with the children and jump into the pool.
And this is the first new family of watches in a decade.
Yeah, since 2009.
Secondly, I'd like to introduce Donald Osborne. And Donald Osborne is the Chief Executive of the Audrain Group. And you first took the wheel of this thing about 5 years ago now?
Yes, just about 5 years ago. And it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be here in Newport, a place that I've come to love very much and very at home here. And it's also great to be back with Wilhelm again. He joined us, of course, here in Newport for our veteran car tour.
You did, that's right.
It was slightly less sunny.
I remember rain. That's all I do remember.
Indeed. Yeah. And then I'm not quite sure whether it's some meteorological thing, but the last time I saw Wilhelm was at the Concorso d'Eleganza Villa d'Este.
Yeah.
You brought the rain again?
I think you brought rain, I believe.
I was good in Scotland and in England.
My final guest needs very little introduction, Jay Leno. And Jay, you've been a legendary enthusiast with cars, and I think you own virtually everything that's built around an engine.
The greatest thing about this is I've now learned how to pronounce the name of my watch correctly. Well, you know what it is? When you grow up in America and you see it in a store, it's like Bruff Superior motorcycles. When people see it, oh, it's a bro. No, it's not a bro, it's a bro. But this is not a name you hear spoken. Everybody knows it when they see it.
Yeah.
So to hear it pronounced correct, thank you, for no other reason. That's why I'm here. You want to be able to speak intelligently when you say the name. So
Well, look, I think we should get started, and I'd really like to sort of begin the discussion because we're all involved in some way with cars and with design. We all have passions on collecting. But I think it'd be really interesting to compare watches with cars over the decades. And you had the brass era of pretty functional cars. It was all about engineering and all about that. And then the 30s and the swoopy designs through to modern supercars and the hypercars. Has the watch industry changed in a similar sort of way as it's grown over the decades?
I think there was a massive change in about the 70s when the Swiss developed the most accurate watch on the planet, called the quartz watch. You know, up until then, it was very easy. The more accurate the watch, the more expensive. So the Swiss developed the quartz watch. They didn't understand that it was easy to copy, and the Japanese took over, and you know the rest is history. It almost wiped out the Swiss watch industry. That's the bad part. The good part is, I think, after that moment, a watch just became more of an expression of your personality, you know, or fashion. It's not a tool like it was probably before.
well, it's interesting because in America, you almost have to go back to the railroad watch, the pocket watch. That's what men carried. Yeah. And when the wristwatch came out, oh, it was a bracelet. You know, you couldn't sell them to men because it's a woman's bracelet with a clock on it. So they gave them to Dempsey, Jack Dempsey, the fighter.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, tough guy, you know, and he had Dempsey's restaurant. So they gave him a wristlet. Would you wear this? So everywhere he would go like this in interviews, and people would see the watch. Much like, you remember it happened one night, the movie with Clark Gable?
Yeah.
He was they had the Hanes Code. You couldn't show men without a shirt. So they developed the T-shirt, which showed his muscles, and it was tight. And every man wanted a T-shirt. And that was so it really comes out of that because This was a man wearing a bracelet. Oh, that was.
It's an interesting thing because, of course, there is also the idiosyncrasy that some people have of wearing their watch on their right hand, which I have seen.
Right.
But that is very, you know why we have right traffic and left-hand traffic, huh? That's because most people are right-handers.
All right.
So that's why, King, I forgot who said, because we drive on the right way, and then Napoleon, who's a lefty, said, no, we drive all on the left. That's why we still have that problem. And that's the same, you would usually old watches or older watches, they don't have what we could call shock systems. And you have no idea how many G you can develop with your hand just doing an abrupt movement. So you would always use the watch on the hand that you use less, which typically for a right-hander would be the left.
Right.
So if somebody is wearing it on the right hand, presumably he's a lefty.
Right.
Or he just show off. That can also be.
Astronauts like NASA, when you're in space, you don't go left and right. You go watch hand, non-watch hand.
Because there is no.
Yeah, because,
What is the orientation?
Because you're up in space,
No.
left. You just get all confused.
There's no north, south, east, and
Yeah,
west.
so they go They go watch hand, non-watch hand.
I didn't know that. That's a new one for me.
yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
In the 20s, they came out with driver's watches.
Yeah.
Right.
Which fit here. So when you're driving, the face of the watch is here. So you would read it like this rather than having to go like
To
that.
turn it over.
Yeah.
Right.
The pilots had it here
Yeah.
because he had both hands. That's why you have these massive straps around these huge, look like pocket watches on the wrist, but they usually went around here because, you could see quickly here, but your hands were busy with other stuff.
Which also would be.
I think there's a good correlation between cars and watches. Now, everybody got smart. When the Japanese flooded or even Swatch, they came out with the cheap watches. They were pretty accurate, so why would you buy an expensive watch? So then instead of going downscale to meet that, the watch industry went upscale to where it became, like to me, I enjoy nothing more than turning the crown wheel on at night and just feeling each distinctive click as it gives you a feeling of secure, whatever you want to call it. I enjoy it. It feels like quality. It's like when you shut the door of a Rolls Royce or something. Or say there's a clunk that's there. And to me, you're selling something more than time because let's face it, you're not going to beat the accuracy of satellite and electronic equipment. But if you can come close and still have a degree of mechanical interest,
I think that's right. And I think, you're combating a trend, and I want to talk about trends later, but I think you're combating a trend of young people, if I may say, using their phones and not having a watch.
Well, yes, I've heard a lot about that, but again, to the point that both Wilhelm and Jay made, it is about fashion. I love watches. I have lots of watches, and I will pick the watch to go with what it is that I'm wearing.
Yeah.
And yes, I carry my phone, and I look at my phone for the time, but I also look at my wrist for the time as well. I will check to make sure that my watch is as accurate as I want it to be with my phone on occasion. But going back to the practicality and usability of watches, and as it relates to cars, we have this conversation all the time. Back in 1909, you could really tell the difference between a top-of-the-market car and a basic car. The performance differential, the materials used, the construction methods. Today, a $60,000 car can basically do everything that a $300,000 car can do.
Yeah.
But why do you buy the $300,000 car?
That's really what we're trying to compare, is that watch and the car.
And when you live in a place like California, you can't tell who's got money, who doesn't. Like if I have to go get something in Beverly Hills, I go, excuse me, can you tell me? People go to see what's on your wrist.
The Concours here at Newport, it's very interesting to see the watches, and I've made a study of this, the watches being worn by owners. I've actually seen, very, very high-end cars and people wearing a Timex, nothing. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it is very interesting. But I think it is a rule that generally car people like watches.
Well, I think you like the mechanicalness.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, almost all the watch. I mean, the old days you kind of covered up the internals. Now the idea is to make it attractive, to see all the pieces interacting and moving, because it shows the accuracy of precision of how you could make a part, literally 1/10,000th. That's so interesting.
As a collector, what are your passions? Are they cars? Is it art?
Dual, it's cars and watches. And as I worked in the car industry before, I moved to the watch industry. And my wife always said, he spent all his money on watches whilst working in the car industry. Now he's working in the watch industry, spends all the money on cars. So it's my spending behavior has not changed, just the direction.
Yeah. Don't really need to ask you.
Well, the interesting thing to me is you've always had precision, just not for the masses.
Yeah.
You've reached the point now where you can bring it to, there's an old joke, not a joke, a bar bet. What has more precision parts, a Rolls Royce or a Model T? And if you're the drunk, you go, people think, Rolls Royce. It's not, it's the Model T. Because they would make one Rolls Royce every 6 weeks, and it's, plane it down a little bit more. Where Model T, each part had to be precision fit or the whole line stopped. Yeah. So boom, you could make 100 cars an hour because every part integrated perfectly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But Jay, that's exactly what we don't sell. That's exactly why people buy watches like our watches, because if you look at it and you see that's all decorated by hands, and if you ever tried to replicate, I've failed miserable because I tried it. And I can assure you none of the parts that I ever worked on went into a watch eventually because they were all either too small or complete. But, that's exactly what collectors of watches want to see. Want to understand how a human being is struggling in getting it to that detail. And there is no watch the same. None of our watches is exactly the same.
Right.
Because an engraver, for example, sometimes he has a good day and he goes a bit deeper into the metal. The next day he is a bit weaker. So it's still, it's still him. It's his handwriting. But as with our handwriting, it's all a little different.
You know the name George Daniels?
Of course I do.
Yeah, he would make 6 watches a year.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the difference. Now you could make, what I meant was more people have access. There's a movie with Tom Selleck called Quigley Down Under. It's a Western. I watch it for one reason. He has a gun that was made in the 1800s that took the maker a year to make. It's one of those, and you can hit a target a mile away. It is as accurate. But for one man to get that much accuracy, it took a year.
That is absolutely George Daniels.
Yeah, now you could make, these are, in the old days, it would have made 2 of these a year or 3 a year. Now you can make quite a bit more. With same degree of precision, it just, you can do it on a larger scale.
Yes and no. No, there's still a limiting factor in at least the watches that we produce are still the hands. They can work 8 hours a day, sometimes 9 if we force them, but not for long. And that's still the limiting factor of our production today. I would disagree. What today is an advantage, we don't hand saw it. It's it's milling, drilling, and all that, which will prepare the parts before they then go to decoration, which is applied by a human being before it's get assembled, which is done by a human being.
I think I mean the same thing you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that when it used to be 1 or 2. Now you could make a few more.
And taking it back to your point, Nic, about collecting and what sort of drives collecting, I collect lots of things. I love art and sculpture, painting, sculpture, and it is that aspect of the human touch. No 2 things are alike. Even if you have a lithograph or if you have a silk screen, each one still has a certain variation. And that's the thing that I love, the fact that this object which is hanging on my wall is unlike all others, even if it's a set of 250. They're not 250 identical pieces. They're not printed in a book or photocopied. And I know that, I don't want to speak for Jay, but I know that one thing which has inspired me in my time with Jay is also having a clear understanding of why something was created, sort of the human feeling about why this was done this way as opposed to the easy way.
At least with the cars and, to some extent with watches as well, but with cars even more, it's the history that's linked to a car, who drove it. Was it involved in a race? What did it go through? And then you see a car from the 50s, which is outstanding, even in today's context. But then if you go back and compare it with the cars that you would have met on the roads during these days. I mean, only then it becomes sort of, well, they've not invented the word supercar back then, but probably that was a supercar back then.
Context is amazing. And context in a sociological point of view, we talk about this all the time, when people who have not had experience with certain objects will say, oh, those cars are terrible, they drive like trucks. Compared to what? In 1953, this truck-like car was one of the most accurate, weapons you could use on the road. And yet, by the standards of a car which you can operate with one finger today, yes, okay, it requires more effort. Just like, again, I'll just bring it back to watches quite neatly. Wearing a watch which is not a quartz or digital watch requires actual maintenance. You have to wind it, you have to set it. You have to think about what it is that you're doing. It's not just an automatic, mindless thing. And that's, I think, a lot of the attraction for me today is I like cars, even new cars, that feel like old cars that involve me in the experience of driving.
That's what I do every morning. I like the winding thing.
Yeah,
it's and it's my morning routine. So I take my watch and I just wind it, and that, it's part of coming alive in the morning. And I like that click, 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 click. And I know that all our watches are different and almost.
And I like it that it needs me.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Good point.
If you're my age, and you might remember this, this has stayed with me since I was 7 years old. There was a TV show in America called Twilight Zone. And it was like weird stories. But there was one with an old man who had a grandfather clock watch. Remember that?
Yeah.
And the day he failed to wind it, he would die. So it's the thing, and every day, week, he would go down and look at, and the one thing, something happened, the grandson, and he got, and he died. He dropped dead. So I still think, if I don't, I'm going to die. I mean, that has stayed with me in my mind. Thinking, would say, okay, I got 6 days left on my 8-day watch. I have a couple of grandfather clocks, and they're 8-day, and I go, okay, I don't want to be that. I don't want to die with that.
So again, our car passions, we mix with many people, fellow car owners, collectors. Is there a similar sort of community for watch owners?
Oh,
do you all get together and,
It's more discreet.
Well, Confucius said, "Man with two watches never have correct time."
And but yeah, there are, it's a very addictive hobby. And once you start collecting, it's like with cars, there's always a good reason to go for the next thing. I think that's the collecting, which is again our end of the market. Some people just wear a watch because they want to wear a watch, and that is a good motivation. If you have more than, let's say, 2 watches, it'll become very difficult to explain unless you say it's an investment or it's a collection. Investment,
It's such
really
a fine line between elegant and just a watch. Like when you look at the numerals on this, I enjoy the way I just like the look of that numeral. It's accurate, each one, exact. It's pretty to look at. It's attractive, It's so funny, and collectors are different. There's a commercial that runs on television where a guy goes, "When you die, what are you going to think about? What you could have bought or where you could have gone?" And I go, "Oh, geez, I could have bought this thing. I could have bought that." And then at the end, he's on a mountain in Chile. I go, "Oh, that's the part."
how do we attract the next generation? Is the younger generation, as they get more affluent, perhaps they're coming into and experiencing watches and getting attracted to?
I don't think that's a problem at all. I think it's one of those things that just,
I agree.
Your dad had one, or, for example, when I was a kid, Rolls Royce was an old man's car. Now the average age of a Rolls owner is 41 years old. And if you're talking about old school and doing it the old-fashioned way, it doesn't get any more.
But I think that's Rolls-Royce have changed their style. I mean, they have got younger in their aspirations, I think.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It really takes care of. If it's worth collecting, you don't have to do any. Believe me, people know quality. When people see a watch like that, people will go, "Hey, what kind of watch is that?" Because there's something different about it. It's got two hands, it tells you time, but there's just something about the quality or the way the second hand stops. It's chronometric, so it stops on you. It's not sweeping like a cheap watch would do. You know, so people just notice it. Oh, what is that?
10 years back, I was at Silicon Valley, and I was invited to do sort of a panel discussion. And I think even back then I was by far the oldest, and I was a lot younger than I am today, logically. So they were all young people, and I was, you know, later on after the panel discussion, and they were hugely educated. They really did know about watches, and they asked the right questions. And then you talk to a 25-year-old that made his fortune by developing an app or a software or, you know, something which probably has a product life cycle of about 6 months, 9 months. And she said, why on earth are you, I mean, the least possible target group you would think are people that work in a field that is so quick and so innovative and so turning quickly. No, they came with old cars, vintage cars, and were wearing mechanical watches, which is, you know, I think there is something in it which goes beyond need, which is important, beyond homologation, which is important, and which resonates with something, at least for people that have a mechanical interest. You can't disappear the magic, because even, you know, I see a lot of watches, as you can imagine, but if you go and go look on the back of the movement, you see all these little parts. Even today, for me, it is still magic, because I would be unable to do it. And I know it does work, and I know how it works, I just can't do it. And it's fascinating.
Well, gentlemen, it's been fascinating. I think I've learnt a few things, how to pronounce certain words. But thank you very much, and I hope to see you again very soon.
Works for me. Anybody idea what time it is?
Yeah, wait a minute.
Why, yeah.
Are we all on the same time?
Yeah.
No,
All at
I'm
the same time.
definitely, for me, it's 20 to 7.
Uh-oh.
From German time.
Well, welcome to the past.
Yes.